Good evening, and thank you, the brave souls that made it south on the 5 tonight. How many of you were stuck in traffic on the way here? Wow. We worry about that setting up evening events, but tonight was just too good to pass up. I'm Judy Gradwell, President and CEO here at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and we are delighted to welcome you here and especially excited to co-host tonight's program with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Both of our organizations share a deep history. The Academy, founded 245 years ago, makes us feel positively embryonic. The Nat, now in its 152nd year, were both created with bold purpose and a shared belief in the power of inquiry, learning, and public engagement. At our core, we're dedicated to bridging the gap between science and everyday life. In a time when information is everywhere but attention spans are scarce, the challenge is no longer just reaching people, it's cutting through the noise, building trust, and helping people understand why science matters in their lives. Here at the Nat, basic science is at the heart of what we do. Our team of 60-plus scientists conduct fieldwork across Southern and Baja California, documenting species, monitoring ecosystems, and tracking ecological change over time. They care for our collections of more than 9 million specimens, which is an irreplaceable record of life in our region. These collections are the backbone of conservation, climate research, and biodiversity research. And this work is particularly meaningful here because we live in the most biologically diverse county in the continental United States. Richness made in part possible by the Kumeyaay people, the original stewards of the land who've cared for the land region since time immemorial. Our goal is to help shape a future where plants, wildlife, and people thrive together and where everyone feels connected to this extraordinary place, and that's why programs like tonight's matter so much. Before we begin, I have just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the emergency exits are located both behind me and behind you. And while we do ask that you silence your cell phones, we encourage you to continue tonight's conversation on social media using hashtag NatTalk. And this season of Nat Talks was made possible by presenting sponsor, the Downing Family Foundation, and our media partner, KPBS, the public media stations serving San Diego and Imperial counties. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Judge Margaret McEwen. It's hard to know where to begin with someone of her distinction, but I'm going to give it a try. She has served for more than 25 years as a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's an affiliated scholar at the Center for American West at Stanford University and serves as a jurist in residence at the University of San Diego School of Law. Judge McEwen served as a special assistant to the Secretary of Interior as a White House Fellow, and originally from Wyoming, she serves on the board of the Teton Science Schools and is author of the award-winning book, Citizen Justice, The Environmental Legacy of William O. Douglas. Please join me in welcoming Judge Margaret McEwen.
Thank you, Judy, and it's really a wonderful thing, I think, that we've been able to collaborate with the NAT, the Natural History Museum, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. But I do want to give a huge thank you to Judy and her staff, because here we are after hours in the museum, and we couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you. So I'm here on behalf of the American Academy, and I'm proud to be part of the local committee that puts on programs, including Dr. Tony Hunter, who I believe is here, Dr. Susan Taylor, and Dr. Barbara Walter. We have 130 Academy members here in San Diego. So for those of you who might not be so familiar with the Academy, it's an honorary society, an independent research center, and it was founded by John Adams and James Bowdoin, other scholar patriots during the Revolutionary War. The idea was, in their words, to cultivate every art and science which may tend to advantage the interest, honor, dignity, and happiness of a free and independent and virtuous people. The Academy members are really quite diverse, everyone from Jane Goodall, you may have seen the poster out there, to Albert Einstein, Justice Scalia, Margaret Mead, Toni Morrison, Joan Baez, and Anderson Cooper. But there actually is a kind of an interesting fact that relates to the museum. Charles Darwin was elected to the Academy in 1874, and one of his specimens is here at the museum. It's a specimen of something called the brown lacewing. I didn't know what that was, so I looked it up, or ChatGPT helped me look it up, and it's a little tiny insect that has sort of tent-shaped wings. In any event, when he was voyaging on one of his collection journeys to Tasmania in 1863, he got this specimen, and it has ended up here at the Nat, which is really pretty cool. So since those early days of both the early patriots and the scientists that have been very involved with the Academy has really convened friends, members, and the public on huge issues. Everything from 18th century innovations on agriculture to fierce debates over evolution in the mid-1800s to nuclear weapons proliferation in World War II, and of course now the health of our democracy in the 21st century. So in every era, the Academy has been rooted in our ability to bring people together across different perspectives, different backgrounds, different areas of expertise. So the question that we're posing tonight, of course, why does science matter? It couldn't be more important to those of us here in the San Diego community, or in fact to our country. Science touches us everything, whether it's from the medicines we take to the ethical questions that we're confronting. And its centrality to our lives must not be taken for granted. So we hope that the panel discussion will inform, inspire, and also prompt you to ask questions. The discussion is really in the great tradition of interdisciplinary conversations. And it turns out that the Academy actually has this formal process called a stated meeting, and they gave me this gavel to actually call the meeting to order. Now, I have to tell you, in the courtroom, they don't let the judges use the gavel. And I don't know if it's because they're afraid we're going to misuse it or we don't know how to use it. But here I am able to say, boom, that we're calling to order the 2,142nd stated meeting of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So now I'm going to turn everything over to Peter Cowhey. He's the Qualcomm Professor of Technology Policy and the Dean Emeritus at the School of Global Policy and Strategy, University of California, San Diego. And the connection to the NAT is he's also the Vice President of the board here. Joining him in the conversation tonight, and we have these huge pictures so you can't miss these people, Dr. Rommie Amaro. She is the professor and endowed chair in chemistry and biochemistry at UCSD. She leads the Amaro Lab, which sits at the interface of chemistry, biology, physics, and pharmacology. Dr. J. Craig Ventnor is a founder and CEO of the J. Craig Ventnor Institute. And he's a biologist renowned for his contribution in genomics, including, and most importantly, the sequencing of the first draft human genome. So also the construction of the first synthetic bacterial cell. Dr. Ventnor is also a member of the American Academy, elected in 2001. So we regret that philosopher Patricia Churchill is unable to join us this evening, but let me turn it over to Peter and the panel. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and on behalf of my colleagues on the panel, I want to express our thanks for your spending time with us. My job is to facilitate the conversation and to make sure that there is enough time at the end for you to be part of the conversation by having a chance to make interventions in the forms of questions. Tonight, we are dealing with the question of why science matters. And so we're going to tackle this by 3 rounds of questions. The first round is going to really allow my 2 colleagues to choose a favorite example of why science matters and how science operates that made that achievement possible. The second round is a moment for them to speculate about something that they think will be an important turning point for science in the future. And the third is going to be a brief exchange about some of the challenges of doing science in today's rather contentious era. Now, you're going to see me looking periodically at my phone. I am not texting, and Judy, I'm not posting on social media. My watch stopped working, so this is my way of making sure that I'm keeping us on time so that we're reserving time for you. So with that said, let me say to my colleagues, we're very eager to hear what you have to say. And Rommie, maybe we can start with you about your favorite example.
Sure. Well, thank you for including me in this today. Just a moment of humility. I just, so everyone knows, I'm rather shocked and pleased and horrified to be sitting next to Craig Venter, who is someone who really inspired my path in science. I was telling him that when I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois, the race to sequence the human genome was just coming across the finish line. And it really inspired me to like the amazing promise of science. So anyway, that's me. Right, so for me, I only just learned a few moments ago that I think Craig might touch on some of the same topics, but I think for me, a great example of why science matters was COVID. You know, that was a genuine global threat that we knew very little about. You know, we didn't really know how dangerous it was, how rapidly it would spread, or very much about it. And I think, you know, faced with a situation where you have enormous uncertainty and, you know, high stakes, science really gives us the best framework to, you know, attack and address those threats. And, you know, that it's not that science always gets it right the first time, you know, but that we have a set of models that we continually update and, you know, that we hold ourselves accountable to in order to really understand the full landscape of what we're dealing with. And, you know, for me personally, one of the things I remember most about like the early days of the pandemic was really, it was just like how the global scientific community just sort of turned like a light switch. It just turned on. And there were scientists all around the world who, you know, really pivoted. Many of us, myself included, I'm sort of in my lab studying the molecular parts of the virus, but, you know, in our kitchens and in our living rooms, in our pajamas, trying to really address this threat. And it wasn't just basic scientists, you know, like me, but it was also clinicians, epidemiologists, and so forth, you know, really coming together, each with their own little piece of the puzzle. And, you know, one of the remarkable achievements, and maybe Craig talks more about this, you know, was the development of the vaccines, right, which saved a number of lives and still do. But we also learned so much about just viral biology and immune responses and so many other things, and we were learning it at such a pace that was just, you know, I don't know, once in a lifetime maybe, I don't know, I hope that we don't have another one too soon, but I guess we find out. So I think that also showed some of the challenges. You know, the beauty certainly in this global collaboration and everyone sort of just leaving their egos at the door and all the things that we could learn when the whole world sort of rode the boat with all, you know, in the same direction. But also in terms of the scientific method and the process, the need to update our models so fast. You know, really, I mean, it was like a decade of learning squished into like 8 months or something. that was challenging. But in the end, yeah, that's sort of, I think, a good example of why science matters.
That's great. Thank you very much. So Craig, I learned that you're going to overlap a little, but you have a unique perspective on these matters. Please lead us through your thoughts.
Well, I was going to start a little bit earlier, but COVID is a great, more recent example. I was going to take us back to around when the academy started, maybe to the 1700s. There are roughly 600 to 900 million people on this planet, but life was very different in the sense that over 90% of families had at least one child die in their first 5 years. It was expected. People had large families because of this to statistically end up with children. People actually waited several years before naming their children. And it's hard to imagine that today. And so what changed? What were the key things that changed that made this happen? The first thing was, maybe looking back, remarkably simple, but it was changes in sanitation. Getting clean water and getting rid of human sewage and trying not to mix the two. So that caused a huge reduction in infant mortality and death overall. But it wasn't until the mid-1800s where things really started to change. The biggest impact in history on infant mortality and human longevity was the development of vaccines. And so they had an even bigger impact than sanitation did. And the first vaccines reduced mortality by 60 to 70%. In this modern era, I was actually surprised that antibiotics didn't really rank. They're considered relatively insignificant. Neonatal care and antibiotics are sort of the third tier in this, but a minor tier compared to vaccines and just improved sanitation. But obviously antibiotics allowed a huge reduction in infant mortality, birth mortality, and surgical mortality. In the 1850s, surgeons didn't wear gloves. They went from patient to patient without even washing their hands. I mean, if your dentist did that, you'd sue them today, but or I would hope you would if you live long enough. But it's and the difference between antibiotics and vaccines, antibiotics treat diseases. They don't cure them and eliminate them, where vaccines, if we look at the record with polio and smallpox, polio has been virtually eliminated, but people who grew up, when I did in the 40s and 50s, we all knew people that had polio. And I remember very distinctly when the polio vaccine came out. It's been virtually eliminated in the US. There's still spots in the world, but smallpox has been eliminated as a disease. And in fact, I was asked many years ago by the Secretary of Health to sequence the smallpox genome. The Russians were going to sequence a strain as well. And especially after we published the sequence, the remaining stores were going to be destroyed, so there'd be no more smallpox. After seeing the sequence and how close it was to vaccinia, which was actually used for vaccination against smallpox, I convinced the government not to destroy the virus because I said it would just lead to false security, because I knew that with coming synthetic methods that we were developing, that we could reproduce smallpox. And now any virus, any bacteria that causes disease, we could remake in a matter of weeks. So I think it was good not to destroy it, but it's been eliminated as a disease totally because of vaccination. I think I'll end there. I'll come back with probably the most important infectious disease, and that's measles, and why that's important in the past and how it might reshape our future.
Great, thank you very much. As I was listening to your account of the history, Craig, I was reminded that the recent Nobel Prize in Economics went to the work of several economists who asked what finally led to sustained economic growth in the world. And there was essentially a picture that if you thought of the Roman Empire through about the mid-1500s, economic growth in most of the world was exactly zero. Almost zero. And the thing that happened in the mid-1500s was that the sort of tinkering and learning by experiments at small scale became married to the growth of scientific societies and organized science and what we would think of today as medicine and engineering, which led to a propelling of innovation, but also its dissemination in rapid ways. And so it's not just that we reduced death, but we opened opportunities for growth along the way. And your story exactly fits that tale. So let me ask you to think a little about what comes next. Rommie, your career represents the fact that what for some of us who are older represented separate disciplines of biology and chemistry, and then over there, computation, and yet your entire career is built at that intersection and the discoveries that come from it as we reshape the boundaries of knowledge and how they act together. So what's your thought about what's next?
Yeah, predictions. I think there's sayings about making predictions, but so right. As Peter, as you say, so in my own personal interest in my lab, as you're saying, I consider us sort of data integrators in some way. So in my group, we develop sort of highly detailed three-dimensional models of biological systems where we can take data from many different kinds of experiments and integrate them into sort of like one cohesive model, but then also sort of propagate their dynamics over time so we can see how proteins move and interact with each other. Right, so it's a combination of all of these different disciplines. And I think, I'm a nerd, so I'm perpetually excited by science. And I've always thought that it was an exciting time to be a computational biologist, just thanks to Moore's Law, which has just given us this amazing wind beneath our wings for so many, years, decades. And now I think, sort of with machine learning and AI really trying to, contribute now and meaningfully contributing to these efforts, I think, what is she getting at? That one of the things I'm most excited about is the creation, the development of digital twins, where we're basically sort of creating computer models or simulated models of biological systems that combine experiment and data and theory or simulation with AI and machine learning so that we can really sort of understand how it works. I love learning how things work, not only at the small scale, but then also like at the cellular scale and going into sort of the whole organism. I'm really excited about that. And I think in the next fight, like in a near-term thing, I think that's going to be really impactful for health in general.
Is there a place where if you had to make a wild guess, right, you're not being held accountable for being right, you would think it would overturn some notion that we have about biological systems?
I mean, I think that there's going to be a lot of that. And that actually touches back on some of the things. I think there will be a lot of that. It's just like so many instances. You know, and I have particular favorites of where I'm really hoping that we do. Like with airborne disease transmission, you mentioned measles. I mean, and also going back to our need as a collective to understand how science works and that we continually need to revise our models. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of places where we understand that, particularly for things like airborne disease transmission and how changes in the climate of the Earth, you know, an Earth's climate actually can contribute to new outbreaks and so forth. But doing better at sort of forecasting and predicting and responding.
Great, thank you. Craig?
So I have two answers. One, I'll start with measles, because the answers depend on what we do as a society, and whether we could go in a more negative or a positive direction. And the trouble is it takes very few people to change the direction of how things might happen. So measles is the most contagious viral disease that we know of. One child can contaminate everybody in the room that's susceptible. It was historically one of the biggest killers because it spread so rapidly. And that changed overnight with the measles vaccine. It went from the era where parents counted on children dying and having large families to actually shrinking. It affected the economy. The families shrunk because they could actually start counting on their children surviving. But the measles vaccine and what happens is a very unusual situation because it's based on herd immunity, which means a certain percentage of the population has to be immune to keep the disease in check. Turns out it's a very high number, it's 95%. And it's a 95% that has to be renewed every year. Not 90%, not most people, actually 95% of the population. So if the rates drop even a little, we start to see major outbreaks. By the time it drops to 85%, so 85% of the population in this country could get vaccinated, and we will be back into endemic, pandemic measles with the change in infant mortality and families having to deal with losing children again. So people think vaccination's an individual decision. It's not, for two reasons. In part, one I gave you about herd immunity. The other is measles has an unusual effect, and it wipes out your immune memory for weeks to months, in some cases years. So a child that survives measles is highly susceptible to all other infections for a period of time. And so if we lose our herd immunity, it's not just a matter of measles coming back, but it's considered that that would be the watershed moment to have the return of all major infectious diseases, potentially taking us back to the 1700s. That's why COVID's an excellent example of how fast new vaccines were developed in front of a new disease. And that's in part, and I'll lead to something more positive, and that's the impact of genomics. So genomics is the discipline that's already had and will have more impact on humanity than any other breakthrough in science. It's because first we learned to read and assemble the genetic code. And as was mentioned in the introduction, we've now learned to take that digital code and convert it back into chemistry and to life. And so using these techniques, we developed the first synthetic flu vaccine. Vaccines with flu are still a very primitive process. And there's a reason why the vaccine that's available doesn't really match the strains that are available, because WHO makes decisions based on antiquated methods of it taking a very long time to produce vaccines. With the synthetic methods, we envision everybody can have a little device attached to a desktop computer, if they exist anymore in the future, or some device that could instantly just print out a new vaccine based on the latest strains that are being circulated. But I also think synthetic genomics has a chance to be a totally new industrial revolution, changing how we make and produce everything, and how we change our own species, hopefully for the better.
Well, there is an ambitious hope in today's world. The scientific enterprise in the United States has been the leading focal point for scientific advancement in the world since roughly World War II. Not that we are alone in producing those advancements, but I think it's fair to say that we were at the epicenter of advancement. Today,
Emphasis on were.
So you're jumping right to the question. So let me ask you about the various challenges that we face and you face as working scientists and how you're coping with them. And maybe, Rommie, I can ask you first about the people equation, a large part of our scientific establishment, both in labs, in the universities, and organizations like Craig's organization are foreign-born PhDs, and today that is under challenge. But at the same time, we're worried about the engagement of youth, and you have a fabulous record in mentoring young scientists and bringing them to success. She doesn't say this often, but if you take a look at teenagers winning the major science awards in the U.S., look at her as their guidepost. So how are you thinking about these challenges of people and talent today?
Yeah, it's tough, you know. Yeah, so in my group, I have about 15 or 20 of us. We're well over half international. And I have to say, it's awesome to be, just the whole, the diversity of thought and perspective and super high skills. I just think it has contributed mightily to, gains in my group and of course across the world, across the United States for science. It's unstable. And I think it is a challenge and kind of, every week sometimes feels like it brings another challenge and instability. Locally, how do we deal with it? We have a strong sort of group, dynamic and supporting each other, and the university does too, which is really great. And also, I think larger organizations in San Diego, and so forth. But it is quite worrisome. I don't have a magic answer really for how we're dealing with it, but I mean, it's certainly also, of course, training. You know, you mentioned training. Of course, as an academic scientist, that is core to what we do, not just for researchers in the lab, but of course in the classroom. And it's a privilege of the professorate, is what I always say, that we get to do that, and a real joy. So, yeah, I guess we just try to keep it going. I mean, I think for many of us, we're just in part hoping that to sort of ride this out, and that it. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't have the best answer. Should we pass it to Craig? What's the magic answer here? It's tough right now. Yeah.
Hopefully people will vote their consciences first. That's probably our only hope. But so I was trained here as a scientist that science was an international community, and in the 70s when I was at UCSD it was. Even exchanges between, at the time, the Soviet Union was considered the arch enemy, but we had several Russian scientists that my mentor Nate Kaplan brought in, and including very high-level ones. Several of them came with minders, but science exchange, intellectual exchange, particularly with China even 5 years ago, was very different than it is today. And it's a problem. If you look at the field I was talking about synthetic biology, China's outspending the U.S. about 15 to 1. Their latest budget was over $15 billion a year. Ours is less than $1 billion. And this is considered the most active area for the economy and the future of science. It wouldn't be a problem if science was open and we had exchanges and collaboration, but now that's being blocked to a great extent, so that makes it more difficult. So science has always been weaponized, and the forefront of science has always been used to create the latest and greatest weapons, but now science itself is being weaponized because of the economic and the health impact. So human genome sequences are a key part of the political scene, where China won't allow any sequences generated there to leave, but they've made a huge effort on gathering them from the rest of the world. China actually is the only country that I'm aware of that misuses genomic sequence. They use it to track their minority populations and keep them in check, is all I can say. So as we're forced to get more isolated, it puts a huge challenge on things. We're used to open exchange of ideas and, most importantly, people. It hasn't really had a huge impact yet. It's just starting to. And my hope is that things will get turned around, because once we wipe out these infrastructures, it's not a matter of just turning a switch back on and having them start up again. Already there's a huge shift where the United States universities are not the first choice anymore for foreign students because of the political situation. And so they're committed to going to get training someplace else, which means they'll probably stay and have jobs someplace else. Our hospitals are definitely already suffering from the lack of interns and residents, which particularly for rural hospitals are the majority of the drivers of healthcare. So I may not sound like it, but I'm genetically optimistic and feel that when this country has come to these impasses in the past, and it has multiple times, that people rise up and demand the right direction. So that's all we can hope for at this stage.
Yeah, there are things sort of, at least in the courts and so forth, I think that's, maybe coming through too. It's slow process though, right? And like you said, I mean, part of what is also, really harmful and worrying is how quickly you can destroy something that took so long to build. And then, rebuilding that is it's a slow process, and boy, you hope you can get there.
Well, if you read the news every day, you'll see there's pockets of measles coming back very dramatically. It's even worse in some other countries, but in this country it was down to close to zero, and now there's outbreaks in about 20 of the states. Some of them, they're isolated in groups in cities where vaccination is culturally dropped off very low. So we're sort of on the borderline before, if we reach that 85% point, it's very difficult to come back from that. You certainly can't do it instantaneously. So people need to be aware of this, and with a government that's anti-vaccine and particularly anti-measles vaccines for children, we have to hope things change quickly.
And you say you're genetically an optimist. Let me just ask one last question before we turn to the audience. The story of research funding that you described, Craig, is actually not a new one. It's been the case that in regards to the U.S. government expenditures for science, it's been essentially stagnant and in real dollar terms declining for some period of time now. And the salvation to some degree in certain fields has been that business research and development spending is in the United States far larger than the government, which is an epic turnaround from what happened after 1945, where the government led and business trailed. And now the numbers are overwhelmingly, even for the most basic research, that business spends more than the government. But the problem is that business, quite rightly, sets priorities based on business. So we get deep investment in areas like AI, but not much investment in other fields not related to the business mission, or maybe it's a spillover at a smaller amount. You've lived at the intersection between the commercial and the fundamental biological, Craig. Do you have a thought about this dynamic and what it means for us?
Well, I've actually used it as a means I've started businesses to fund research at my not-for-profit institute when the government would not fund it. For example, the government was so concerned about making a synthetic cell that they were afraid to fund it. And so I started a company whose goal was to fund it in exchange for the IP, and also the human genome, we managed to sequence it in 9 months instead of 15 years, and we did it for roughly $100 million instead of $5 billion, but who's counting? But one of the things that is currently still unique to this country, and that you go to Europe, there's virtually no venture investment whatsoever. Countries like Australia have virtually none. There's also very little philanthropic giving, so this country is unique, and people are unique in terms of not all of them, but fortunately the majority of people that make outside amounts of money feel an obligation to give it back to society in some way. A lot of current ones could do a lot better than they're currently doing, but also between investment and philanthropy, those are the two arms that make up with the changes in government. But most people don't know this, but ironically, the most funding for NIH has come with the Republican administrations, not Democratic ones. And it looks like Congress is trying to come through and have that happen again. So, but we have to wait and see.
Great. And on philanthropy, I just might add that in some work that we've done at UCSD, we've discovered that for university and independent laboratories like Salk, philanthropy is funding roughly the equivalent of 40% of the U.S. government budget for basic research. So it operates at a scale that is just unimagined in any other country. And indeed, it's been one of our saving graces. Well, it's time now to open the floor to all of you. We have about 25 minutes, and we welcome all your questions. And Susan,
Great. I have two questions. First, John Adams was one of the founders of this company. I don't know if people recognize it, but actually they exposed themselves to low levels of smallpox. Smallpox was the big thing, and they sort of vaccinated themselves early on. But the other thing, you mentioned measles. So many of us old people, we all got measles when we were a kid. You didn't die of it, most people. But then polio, you did die of it. And you did talk about polio because we all had neighbors who died of polio. And so that polio vaccine was a major thing. We all remember. I remember when we first got that polio vaccine, we're going to die of that. Most people didn't die of measles, but people did die of polio. And you had lung people, kids, your neighbors in the hospitals with on the ventilators. And so polio is the big thing that really changed. You know, everybody kind of, from my age, remember when you got your first polio vaccine. So, I mean, you know, these are from the early John Adams to polio vaccine. Vaccines were really important. And those seem to me, measles is you can see now it's spreading the idea that this is going to happen at a global scale. But really those things, vaccines have been so important.
okay, I'm going to intervene here for two reasons. One is that it's hard for people in the back to hear. So I'm going to repeat back the gist of the question or the comment as succinctly as I can. And it might also help if when you ask a question or make a comment, you stand up and try to speak loudly. So the gist of this intervention was that the turning point in some ways for the impact of vaccines was less about measles because the morbidity rate was lower and greater from the polio vaccine where the morbidity rate was much higher and the impact much worse for most families if polio occurred. Susan, we've got
But
the
also
point.
John Adams.
John Adams can skip for the moment. John is not going to protest my omission. So with that, let me turn to the panel for if they had any comment on that.
Well, I'm old enough, as Susan is, to, I remember standing in line to get the polio vaccines, which were handed out in sugar cubes. This was before Timothy Leary and his sugar cubes, but it was an important cultural event. Susan and I both have a good friend and colleague at UCSD that's suffered from polio his whole life. And everybody before the vaccine knew somebody that either had polio or had died from it. A classmate that was in a wheelchair from it. So it's probably more dramatic because it happened so suddenly There was a before and after in real time in our lifetimes. So, but measles has killed far more people than polio. But we don't need to have a contest.
If I could just add one thing, sorry,
Oh, yeah,
you're about to
sorry.
go. Well, just that, something that, I think about a lot, I'm sure many of you do also, and I don't have, where I don't necessarily have the right answer, but, right now we are getting a lot of conflicting information from sort of, the powers that be in HHS, for example, about the vaccines, even where they're sort of disagreeing with each other, and that is something we really need to think about how we tackle better in terms of not only just communicating to like the public, but also just, I guess that's the big part of it. Like, how do we really get people to keep up at 95%? Because I think we're down to about 92 right now and dropping.
So part of it is confessing that vaccines do have side effects in certain people. The adjuvants do in some people, and in fact, vaccinia has major side effects that affected a substantial number of people. And it turns out we were asked to sequence the vaccinia vaccine after we sequenced smallpox. And it turns out vaccinia is at least 5 different viral isolates. So it wasn't a single isolate. So there's a new smallpox vaccine now that's taking one of the isolates that did not cause major side effects, and that's the standby emergency vaccine. But, when so many people are healthy and alive and you're not having your children die, the side effects that affect a very small percentage become much more visible to all of us. And I think in the past, the government and the pharmaceutical industry has been very poor at acknowledging that, because the overwhelming good was to society as a whole. But, every vaccine, just like every medicine, does have populations that have side effects, and I'm hopeful that some of these will become much more predictable as we understand genomics much better.
Great. All right.
Thanks, Peter, Rommie, and Craig. I think we could all appreciate that science does matter. I think the essential question, Rommie, is what you were getting at. Why trust science? It used to be that there was an inherent trust of science, but at the time of COVID, if you read the article today by Russ Gausman in the New York Times, where he interviewed Jay Bhattacharya, who's the head of the National Institute of Health, there's kind of an inherent distrust of science there. And he developed it, as you remember, during the COVID era, because he thought the way that people were going about it was completely wrong, and that the scientists were actually not telling the truth about 2 things. One, about how infectious it was and how much of the mortality it caused, and 2, about the lockdowns and how effective they would be. So the question becomes, how do we not only communicate better, but how do we communicate in a way that the population that doesn't have a scientific degree will be able to trust us, which then leads in the funding issue as well.
All right. So the gist of this question was, we have the current head of NIH, who is in so many ways a skeptic about the scientific enterprise he leads, stemming from his worries during COVID about whether the consensus in the science community about infection rates and morbidity were correct, and second of all, about the advice about the lockdown, and that this spins out into a sort of a general distrust of science that we're starting to see today. So these are two separate types of charges in a way. So responses?
Well, I think the distrust goes back even further because a lot of people don't know that NIH was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, that if you use the Occam's razor method of eliminating possibilities, the hypothesis that has to be disproven is that COVID wasn't started in the laboratory in Wuhan artificially, not to create a highly contagious drug, but doing gain-of-function research that first infected researchers that then, whether they went to the market or however it escaped is unknown because neither the some parts of people that were involved in it in the U.S. government aren't talking about it, and definitely the Chinese government is not letting access to things. So COVID started with the mystery in the first place, and we've never really been confronted with an infectious disease like that in the sense that flu was very different. And the reality is nobody knew the right answers. That, you know, these were all best guesses. They were treated as fact by some people because they had to become policy. Tony Fauci's a friend. He's really a brilliant guy. They were using the best knowledge from previous pandemics and what you see in movies like Contagion of how you try to control a major pandemic, but nobody really knew how to. I don't think guesses were really that far off. It got under control faster than I certainly expected it would, but they were guesses. And it's probably tough to get people to follow things if you're telling them you're guessing, but they're educated guesses.
Well, this is also why I think it's important that like we just can talk about how science is as a like a method and a process, that we're constantly updating our models, that it shouldn't be a surprise that, you know, 6 months or down the road when a new variant comes, that okay, the guidance is going to get updated again. But you know, we also sort of fail as a society, I guess, to really make that part clear. And then, you know, I mean, also the whole thing with masking, to be honest, you know, as somebody who really appreciates the whole droplet dogma and, you know, that whole situation also, I think was maybe, I guess it's just, you know, I guess it's true. Like if you're a policy person, you need to come off with confidence and so forth that what you're saying because you want people to believe. But in the end, we're a little bit also maybe suffering from our own inability to do a better job at some of the basic training of folks.
Well, lots of countries did it different ways,
Yeah.
and Sweden tried to just generate herd immunity by letting everybody get infected. It didn't turn out so well. So I think, well, some of the procedures were a little heavy-handed. Wearing masks was one of the smartest things, probably.
100%. Yeah, no, I'm super pro mask. I mean, like what type of mask and maybe, you know, different ways to use tools, but, you know, to acknowledge that it was also airborne.
But it is hard for people to understand the science process. It was always taught so extremely dogmatically, as everything was an absolute. And my good friend and colleague for 20 years, Ham Smith, the Nobel laureate, who died last year, we actually believed it. When we went to make the first synthetic cell, We believed what most scientists did, that biology was fundamentally known, and we should be able to go through the literature and find all the components needed for life, put those into a genome and boot it up, and we would get a living cell. It didn't work. All of our designs totally failed. And the biggest surprise, and what is listed as, after a long effort of trial and error, roughly a quarter of the genes absolutely essential for life in this minimal cell are of unknown function. When we look at the human genome, over half the genes are of unknown function. And from all the sequencing my team has done in the oceans and other places, we have about 100-to-1 ratio of genes of unknown functions to ones we know. But when we started, if you ask any scientists, they would say, yes, all the rules of biology are fundamentally known, and we know how everything works. My most famous quote that's used in schools is when I said, "We don't know shit about biology."
There was a rock and roll song about that, wasn't there? All right. So that we aren't abusing the time of all the audience, I'm going to take 2 quick questions, and we will have quick responses and then bring it to a close. One here and one in the back over there. First here.
Yes, so I'm a scientist, so I get a lot of questions from family and friends usually when they know, like if they hear something and they want to believe.
Louder.
I'll repeat back, okay? Let her speak.
I can be louder. So I'm a scientist, so I have a lot of friends and family who come to me whenever they feel like, oh, this is something that I want an answer for. And I do find myself having to try to get that nuance of science knows things, but every time we get something new, that's the new thing. And also, I wonder sometimes, at least for vaccines, if we just got too good at them, that people start dying, and we are in a situation in which like people are forgetting too fast how bad it was before we had it good.
Good. So the intervention was that as a scientist, even with family and friends, there is the frustration of both nuance, but also because of rapid successes in certain fields and solving problems, people forget how bad it was before the problem was solved. Back there.
I've been told that life is the progressive narrowing of choices. So how do you make sure that you make good ethical and scientific choices?
Well, there's a way of capping off the questions from the audience. And I think everybody heard that. The question is, in a narrowing of choices that comes with life, how do you make sure you don't take a path that leads you to a narrow set of ethical choices that maybe aren't the best menu, if I could translate that? Yeah. We're run out of time, so they don't.
No, it's a very important question because there's a discipline called bioethics and bioethicists. And a lot of people wanted the bioethicist to become the priest of science to tell people what was ethical and what was not. My view is just the opposite of that, is every single scientist has to have their own ethical basis of what they do and what they bring to their work. When we were proceeding to make the first synthetic life form, we didn't just start and do it and say, the hell with it, we're going to proceed. We did a 1.5 year long review with the community, led by bioethicists. And the first thing that happened in 2010 when we announced the first synthetic cell, it was pre-agreed, but President Obama announced his new bioethics committee that was going to review making synthetic life. I think it's the first time in modern science where an announcement, I got comments from the president and the Pope on the same day.
That's pretty cool.
President Obama applauded our attempt at making synthetic life. The Pope said Dr. Venter did not create life, he just changed one of its motors. But we welcomed his comments because it sort of calmed down people that it wasn't a threat to them. But we all have to have our own ethical standards, but largely the community then has to accept or enforce those. You know, that there's no outside party that can tell me what my ethics should be. They developed throughout my lifetime, and I apply them every day in the work that I do. And that's what we all have to do.
Rommie?
I mean, yes. Well, that's really cool about the Pope, particularly. I mean, I'll just say, just to echo, I agree with Craig. I think also, you know, at least on the science side, you know, depending on which domain you end up sort of narrowing towards. I think there, in many of the domains that I see, and I touch quite a few, there is, I think, more acknowledgement, you know, I guess it's like you were saying, of different ethical concerns and ways of appreciating sort of the complexity of those situations. And again, it's probably a case where there isn't one completely right answer that's very certain that you can draw the line. And you know, that's yet another facet of the whole science enterprise that we deal and grapple with on a daily basis, I guess.
Well, with that, I recognize that we have gone beyond the official closing time of the program, but I also know that we can't come to a close without Judge McEwen gaveling us shut, so I hand it over to her.
Well, join me in thanking this amazing. You know, we're so fortunate in San Diego, in the San Diego community, to have resources like Craig and Rommie. It's just remarkable. We've talked about all the challenges today: politics, policy, funding, basic research, and ethics. So let's leave you with one thought, and that is channel your inner genetic optimism. Thank you. We're adjourned.